Here we are. I'm back for another fun session. So we recently added property and casualty, P&C, typically referred to in the biz, as they say. And what that means for you is it covers a lot, actually. It covers more than homeowners and auto. It also covers commercial. There's a lot of individual products. But in New York State specifically, this new line covers quite a bit. And today we're going to talk about auto. And when you say auto, even that by itself has lots of definitions. It could be your individual car driving to work. It could be a business car, maybe something your company owns. Or if you're the owner of a business, it could be a car you lease out or let staff borrow, all sorts of things. And then, of course, it could be a really fun topic is there's specialty insurance for automobiles that are like collectors. You get the Batmobile. I'm sure whoever owns a Batmobile, which by the way, last time I saw it was at Comic-Con in Buffalo, and I think there's a gentleman locally in Buffalo that owns one of the Batmobiles. So I'm sure that gentleman owns a special policy for that because of the value of the collectible. But typically, most folks have in basic, New York State requirements, auto policy, right? Damages sustained if you cause damage to property. Hopefully not injuring, but if you're injured, there's certain coverage there. And of course, we've all heard the commercials, and sometimes, the insurance is not enough and people go to litigation for it. So for that reason, insurance is typically not cheap, right?
Right. So, Rob, what's the difference between liability and full coverage?
Oh, sure. So in New York State, we're in a no fault state. Okay. So basically, the government got involved a while back because they saw all the court cases of all these accidents, and sometimes they were fender benders, very minor, a couple scratches or whatever, and yet people still went to court. And New York's like that's pretty costly. From the state's perspective, they're using up the courts for these relatively small dollar amount accidents. So they make a certain classification, which New York State is not the only one, but it's one of the states that says no fault. So if you and I leave here and I decide I'm going to race you at the light, and I run into someone. Well, actually, that's not true. That would be liability. If I'm doing something against the law, that's going to be a liability. But let's just say we leave here and our cars just accidentally bump into each other, right? Park next to each other.
Okay.
I'm drinking my coffee or something, which I shouldn't be doing. Again, that could be a liability. But let's just say I'm really safe 10 and 2, yours 10 and 2, and we still, bump bumpers or whatever. You gotta fill out the claim. That's going to be no fault. So my insurance will say, okay, I guess we'll take care of it. Okay. But if you get to a situation where you're liable because you did something wrong, or it could be anything, speeding, running through a red light, all those things. And of course, the worst case scenario is somebody got hurt. Now you need more coverage than what the state minimum is. In New York State, you typically have a requirement, and maybe your policy is this, where it's a certain amount of dollars that can be used towards property damage.
Mhm.
Okay. It could be car, obviously, mailbox, what have you, medical. And then there's a third number, which is the combined total per accident. So, in a scenario where multiple people are in a car and more than one person is injured, there's a combined total dollar amount in the policies.
Okay.
Now, what if the accident was so severe, and let's say there was several people in it and all of their medical bills were much higher than your coverage? Now that gets into the realm where someone, the insurance carrier is not going to cover that. You don't have coverage past a certain dollar amount. So now you get in the situation as, oh, okay, this might go into some type of litigation. So there are policies that some of the terms out there is like full comprehension. That's where you have a higher dollar amount. You're covering yourself from liability. Even extreme scenarios where you are doing something against the rules, going through lights and speeding, that the carrier will still accept that risk to a certain degree. Because why? Because you're paying more for that. So there's a state minimum requirements on your auto that you have to do in New York State.
Right.
And then you can carry higher coverage if you want. And then, not to go off the topic of this video, but then there's this additional thing a lot of folks have nowadays, which is an umbrella policy. And typically, people that have umbrella policies are concerned about that scenario I just laid out. They're concerned that if they get into an accident, or someone in their family, a teenage driver or whatever, or a spouse, or let's say you're trying to help your neighbor, a neighbor needs a car because they have a flat tire and you let the neighbor drive the car. Any of those situations where it causes an accident that isn't typically going to be covered, or the damages are exceeding the coverage amount. A lot of people say, if there's something like that happens to me, I want to have excess coverage just in case.
Right.
So they might have a very typical umbrella policy it's called that for what it sounds like. It's kind of an all-encompassing thing. Typically, someone has a homeowner's policy and their auto combined, and then an umbrella to kind of say, well, if something happens at the house or the car above the normal limits, we'll give you an extra amount. And typically, I've seen it's very common to see like $1 million, which sounds like a lot of money. But if it's a really bad accident where, God forbid, there's a fatality or something, or you run into something that really is expensive, right? You run into a collectible car or a fire hydrant, and the town has to spend a lot of money to repair it. You get into something that's very expensive. Most people find peace of mind in having an umbrella policy, especially if that person is vulnerable to litigation. Let's say they're self-employed, right? Let's say they often let people drive their car,
Mhm.
right? That's an excess liability that they might want to have extra coverage on. So, but back to the core of the auto, it's very important that we understand in New York State right now, since COVID era, really, we're finding a lot of carriers have stopped trying to offer policies. We all know these attorney commercials in every city in the state. You can turn on the radio and always hear a claim, excuse me, a commercial for an attorney. If you're in an accident, call their number. They'll help you litigate. And while that's an important service, and we're certainly not attorneys, we're not picking on attorneys, it's an important service. But this state has seen a much higher than average amount of litigation cases. Even with the no fault policy that they have out there, they still see a lot of people go to court over car accidents.
Mhm.
So if you're a carrier, let's say you're a carrier in all the other states, and you're looking at the one where you seem to spend a lot more time in court, which means you spend a lot more time paying your attorneys, you can see where they might start saying, well, maybe New York isn't, the state we want to do a lot of business in. And we
Right.
even find as agents that sometimes, we have carriers that limit, the amount of policies and appointments they give us simply because they're trying to watch their own risk. So insurance is a very, unfortunately, very complicated
Yeah,
and
it is.
sometimes very frustrating, not just for clients like yourself, but believe me when I say for us as the agents, when we're trying to
Yes.
solve problems for clients, find the right coverage, find the right policy. Sometimes we hit a few walls and luckily, Meg here can throw some dynamite in there, blow the wall up. We find the solutions either way.
One way or another.
Yeah, we should call this a Rubik's Cube agency. It seems like we do that sometimes. However, it's extremely important based on everything we're talking about and all the things that are changing. Since COVID, a lot of people stopped driving, right? We were home for a while. So the rates actually kind of paused just that initial year. In fact, some carriers like personally, the carrier I had at the time, uh, they actually sent us a little rebate check. Not much, not significant, not even like a full, you know, month or two's worth of driving premiums, but just a little like, hey, we're all going through this thing. Here's a little bit of check because you're not driving as much. So the theory is there's less accidents, right? And that was true for 2020.
Right, because less people are on the roads.
Yeah, less commute, less trips, less business travel. A lot of business travel kind of stopped. You think about the airport and how many cars you see at the airport. Well, when the flight stopped, there's no cars either.
Right.
So 2020 was a very odd year for many, many reasons, obviously, but specifically for auto insurance. The carriers are like, hey, we're still collecting premiums. We've had way less accidents. So for goodwill, I think, and branding, some of them just, send out little checks, like thank you checks. Totally get that. But since then, it seems to me, as a customer myself, that every single carrier has been increasing prices. So the overwhelming point I'm trying to really get out there to you is that you can't be, I'll use a car term, don't stay in neutral, okay? Look at your policies regularly, at least once a year, especially if you have, it set up to pay annually anyways. Some people do monthly and quarterly, it's totally fine, but at least once a year. Pick a day that's, whatever, just pick a random, if it's not the policy dates and you pay monthly, pick another day throughout the year, maybe your birthday, the week of your birthday,
I do it
maybe.
every 6 months.
There you go. Whenever it makes sense, just make sure that what you have makes sense. And that's what we do. Okay. Even my own policy, I don't just sit and throw it in a drawer and leave it alone. I mean, I want to make sure that I'm up to the limits I think I should have for my own personal thoughts on risk. And I also want to make sure my premium's as low as I can get. There are discounts out there. There's a safe driving course, which if you don't, or if you're not familiar with it, you haven't done it, I highly recommend that. No matter what carrier you're with, and if you use us and contract with us for your needs, we even have some vouchers and coupons and things like that. You can take this course, which for the most part is online now, and you can just carve out a Saturday morning or something that fits your schedule. Preferably you and any other licensed driver in your house should sit around a computer
Right.
like we are now, and just understand you're going to spend 2 or 3 hours, and that seems like a burden. It's no more than a movie. It's not as entertaining, but it is actually informative, especially if you have teenage drivers. New drivers of any level should absolutely be doing this. I highly recommend that, regardless of the extra benefit that you will have a discount on your policy for the simple fact that carriers will reward financially drivers that take the time to take these refresher courses. It's only, I think it's every 3 years you can do that. Might be two. I got to double check, but it's every 2 or 3 years. You sit through the course, you take a little quiz at the end, and they'll give you a code, which you'd either call us and we'd record it for you, or you call your carrier directly, and they apply the discount. Some of the other common discounts, of course, is if you own a home, there's homeowners and auto, you put that together.
Well, another thing too, they do for new drivers, teenage drivers, is their grades.
Yes,
Get
that's true.
discount,
That's a new one. Yep.
they get discounts for good grades
Yep.
too.
And you want to be accurate with your information. The old adage of less is more when you're doing these things. That's not really the case. A lot of people forget about things that would actually save them money. For example, I just recently bought for my car, for my policy benefit, one of those dash cams. Okay, so I got a front and back dash cam. Well, think about this. It's two sides of this coin, but the benefit that I am interested in is the carrier says, well, heck, if he's in an accident, we're going to have footage of the accident.
Right.
So we'll know if someone did something that caused damage to his vehicle or his, God forbid, his family. So that's the benefit, right? They say, we'll reward you financially because you have these things that will help us in case we have to evaluate damage later. The other side of the coin is, well, now there's evidence if I do something wrong, right?
Right. Right.
So again, that's just an example. There's a lot of discounts. And the biggest thing is just at least once a year, minimum, once a year, give us a call. We'll double check your policy. If you're with us already, or you plan to in the future, obviously, we'll have everything that we know about you, but things can change. Things can change. You might add a new driver. There might be someone turning of age that they're getting their first license. You might be in business. You might have an extended person stay with you for a while that's using your vehicle. You might buy a home. You might sell a home. There's things that could affect your rate and your coverage. So first and foremost, you want to make sure you're covered at all times. You want to make sure you're within the rules of the contract. So when you have a life change, you want to call us. And secondly, you want to make sure you're not overpaying. I mean, that's just the bottom line for everybody, myself included.
Right.
Keep in mind, we started this agency because we were kind of sick of getting ripped off. I mean, we're in the world of everyone shops through their phone. You can't do that. You should not do that. I should say you should not do that. Not for the important purchases like your insurance that takes care of you, your family, your property. You want to make sure you have the right coverage. So that's my shortest version of that. So
Give
just
us a call so we
yeah,
can help. 716-449-5977.
yeah.
And
And also keep in mind, we do help and we try to help as many folks as we can, not just individuals and families, but companies, 100 years ago or so, I owned a small business that you and I worked at. And I had
Oh,
multiple,
fun.
I had multiple vehicles, right? I had multiple vehicles. And there was a delivery component. So that was a very expensive proposition for insuring vehicles that other people were driving.
Mhm.
So we do help business owners that have that, whether you're a small pizzeria, you might be a car dealer, the car dealerships, of course, are required to carry high levels of insurance, mostly from the manufacturers. There's fleet insurance if you're in transportation. So, and even if you're a car collector, you might have those are fun. Those are fun. I do have some friends that have some cars. They go to shows. The Veterans Post sometimes has these cars on display. It's fun, but you have to think
I
those
like
are,
the car shows.
yeah, the car shows, but those are high dollar value. If something happens to those, you're not, you have to have the right coverage for what you own, what you operate, and anyone that you care for that is behind the wheel and in that vehicle. So no half measures, as we say. You gotta thoroughly look through your policy. If this sounds boring to you, send it to us. We'll look through it. We'll explain what you have. We'll see how you are feeling about the limits of your coverage. We'll look for any discounts. And by all means, we'd be happy to serve. So, all right. So, all right. Well,
See you
give
next
us a call.
video.
Yeah. See you next time. Take care.